good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, good night, whatever time of night or day it may be, wherever you may be. So I've found out that today is an interesting day. Some of my friends in Discord alerted me. I should have known this, but I had no idea such a thing even existed. But today is World Goth Day. I thought I would make a video on this and also in the process explain my @global handle that you see in the channel tag I use so often there, @ProtoGoth. So a Proto-Goth is a person like myself who was around before the Gothic subculture had a name and was already interested in some of the same things that the later Gothic people came along and became interested in. Before Bauhaus was a band, I had a life-size poster of Bela Lugosi's Dracula on my bedroom wall, for example. So yes, I would be considered by later Gothic subculture members, participants, whatever, to be a Proto-Goth. Now, Proto-Goths don't generally do the full Monty, if you will. It's not something that we are constantly obsessed with or live. It's not a lifestyle for us so much as it is just a way of thinking and things that we like, basically. You're not going to find a lot of Proto-Goths who would be confused with emos as a general rule. And most of us are older now and don't really do club scene much anymore, although, you know, I do occasionally, very, very occasionally, go to a club. Anyway, so today is, as I said, World Goth Day. And I will put a link in the video description to the website for World Goth Day. You can go and read about it and so forth. This little encoder that I use doesn't have center guides, so I kind of have to wing it to center some of these images. But anyway, World Goth Day it is today. Now, for those who believe that the Gothic subculture is a new thing, well, it kind of is and it kind of isn't. Goth chicks, as this meme says, it's not anywhere near as new a phenomenon as you thought. You see there, the original television series, The Addams Family, from the 1960s. This was based on a comic strip by Charles Addams about the Addams Family, but this is the thing that I remember. I didn't encounter the comic strip until much later in life. When I was quite young, this was on television, and I remember it being on television for years and years after in syndication on UHF channels. Some of you may remember those. The television series debuted in 1964, and Morticia Addams, played by Carolyn Jones, was an inspiration to a lot of us. But it wasn't only the Addams Family. There were other shows and movies at the time, and older movies that we could see on Saturday afternoon. Back in those days, Saturday morning was for cartoons, and then Saturday afternoon we had science fiction movies, and sometimes those were what might be called classic monster movies, like the old Bela Lugosi Dracula movies, and Boris Karloff, and Lon Chaney Jr., The Wolfman, and Frankenstein's Monster, House of Dracula, all that good old stuff. Sometimes they were other sorts of monster or science fiction movies like Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, and so forth. So, and then after those, I guess there would be like 1 or 2 science fiction movies. After that went off, then on would come Western movies. And then later in the evening, on Saturdays, most of those channels started playing country music television shows. I remember my parents were very much into that style of music, and so I remember from my childhood shows like the Wilburn Brothers and Porter Wagner and the Wagon Masters and Jim Ed Brown, and I don't even remember what all now. Goodness, that was a long time ago. Anyway, so as I said, it wasn't just the Addams Family. There were other television shows at the time like Dark Shadows. As you can see here, this I believe is a model. I'm not sure if this is an actual house or not. I seem to remember having read somewhere that it doesn't really exist, never did, but that it was a model used in the show. Dark Shadows was a gothic soap opera that aired in the 1960s. I believe the first episode was in 1966, 1965, and then it ran for a few years. So yeah, that was a I remember watching it faithfully as a little kid, and we had back then, when it was first on, we had a black and white television that was one half of this console thing that sat in the living room, and the other half of it was a phonograph player. So that was that was a long time ago. It wasn't too much longer after that we had a color TV, though. Anyway, there were other influences upon us as well, the Proto-Goths. One of them was um, the comic book Vampirella. This is the original #1 issue of Vampirella in the original run from September 1969. The cover art by the great Frank Frazetta. So Vampirella was from another planet called Draculon. And that was quite interesting. Little comic book. I remember, well, actually, it was a big comic book back in those days. It was one of those magazine-sized comics. So I remember reading that occasionally. No, I probably didn't read it in 1969 because it was in kind of the, placed in areas of the comic section that kids didn't really get to go to, I guess. But by the 70s, in the 70s, I started looking at that. But if we want to go back further, Gothic or Proto-Gothic, the attitude has a lot to do with being yourself, with being true to yourself, thinking for yourself, being your own person. The great Coco Chanel, who, among other things, was responsible for the perfume Chanel No. 5, has this quote: "The most courageous act is still to think for yourself aloud." And if we want to go back even further, we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau from the Enlightenment period. He said, "The world of reality has its limits. The world of imagination is boundless." So this concept of imagination and thinking for yourself is really not a new thing, and that's a lot of what it means to be Gothic or Proto-Gothic, in this sense anyway. And, we have this statement here from the Addams Family: "Normal is an illusion. What is normal for the spider is chaos for the fly." That reminds me also of a quote from a more recent Gothic personality, if you will. I'm not really sure if she's Gothic in real life or if she's just Gothic in the character she plays, and that is Abby Shuto from NCIS. And she said at one point in the show, "Strange is not a crime." So it's not a crime to be strange, and I try to surround myself with only top shelf strange, however. So, I mean, we have a lot of influence that goes back to before there were even Proto-Goths. There were people called beatniks who dressed in black and hung out in coffee shops and played the bongos and listened to I guess, bebop jazz, so like Thelonious Monk and people like that, and smoked cigarettes and recited poetry. Um, so that was probably an influence or a predecessor, a precursor to the Proto-Gothic. Um, I hesitate to call Proto-Gothic a subculture or a lifestyle or a movement, but however you want to describe it, phenomenon, that might be a good term for it, eh? In more recent times, we have had people like Angelina Jolie who said, when other little girls wanted to be ballet dancers, I kind of wanted to be a vampire. I can relate, Angelina, I really can. Um, there's her looking all goth, and here's artwork by someone at DeviantArt. I will put, let's see, I can find out who did that right here. It's by iFunkyMunky at DeviantArt, so go check that out. Um, but anyway, Proto-Goths were people who were interested in or had an interest in, were fans of, however you want to put it, um, Gothic horror movies and television shows and the like. Um, so again, it's not a new phenomenon. It goes way back to at least the early 60s, mid 60s, and was inspired by some of the older, the classic movies like with Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, Lon Chaney, and the like, people who did those movies back in the 30s. We used to watch those movies a lot, and there was just something about them. I don't know if it was the music or the atmosphere, in which the visual atmosphere there, it may have been a combination of all those things. I mean, in Dark Shadows, you had that music and that atmosphere there too. I guess the first season, maybe the first two seasons of Dark Shadows were in black and white. I may be wrong. They may have switched to color during the first season. I would have to actually go and look that up. But anyway, so that's an explanation of why I call myself Proto-Goth sometimes. It's I just kind of chose it at random whenever I set up my account for Star Trek Online because, I needed an account name and I hadn't used that one before, so I thought, hey, I'll just call myself Proto-Goth. So anyway, that's an explanation of where I get that handle from. It's a kind of a brief explanation of what Proto-Goth means. And again, you're not going to find a lot of Proto-Goths who wear all black all the time, especially now as we have gotten older and, like I said, don't really do the club scene so much anymore. I mean, there are probably still people my age who do, and that's fine, but I don't really myself very often go to a club. I mean, I live in, unfortunately, a Baptist-ridden state, so, I mean, our legislature is Baptist-ridden, so we have these things called dry counties, in which it is illegal to buy or sell alcohol unless you happen to have a private club license. And so if we want to go to a club, we have to travel some distance out of the county. In my case, the closest club would be about an hour away. And that means, of course, if I'm going to actually spend any time there and drink, then I would have to get a room or have a designated driver who would not be drinking, who could drive me home. Because otherwise, yeah, you run the risk of killing yourself or someone else while driving intoxicated. Or if you manage to survive, you also run the risk of getting arrested and getting a DWI and having your insurance payments go up significantly, and so forth and so on. None of that sounds like any fun. And of course, I would not want to be responsible for killing or injuring or maiming anyone, or myself. I, as much as I like these kind of movies, vampire movies in particular, I am not really the kind of person who has a death wish, you know. So anyway, that's about a little bit more than 15 minutes, so I'm going to cut it off here. I would like to make my videos generally 15 to 20 minutes as a general rule, yeah, because people don't really watch videos that go on for 30 minutes or an hour. I mean, some people do, but a lot of people don't. So, I'm going to cut this off here, and I wish you all a happy World Goth Day today, and tonight as well. So those of you who do still go clubbing, and be safe, but have fun.